President Macron said last night in an address to the nation, a formal address to the nation, that he would now open a debate on extending the French nuclear umbrella, as he called it, to other European countries. Germany has expressed an interest in this. So somehow France's vital interest will be extended to include a threat to the rest of Europe.
It's 7 minutes past 6. There are two countries with nuclear deterrents in Europe. The UK is, of course, one of them. But the Times this morning reveals the extent that the UK needs America to make its Trident missile work.
We use American-built missiles, and we need American maintenance and support. Given the way the US has been moving away from us under Donald Trump, the UK is now being urged to work out how to make our deterrent truly independent. Experts tell the Times it would cost tens of billions, which of course we do not have. It's a sobering must-read this morning.
So what about the other European country with nuclear weapons? That's France. Unlike the UK, France doesn't share its deterrent with nuclear allies. But that's going to be discussed at an EU summit today in Brussels. President Zelensky will also be there. We're joined now by Adam Sage, the Times' Paris correspondent. Good morning.
Good morning.
So France is looking at changing how it sees or uses or deploys its deterrent. What's behind that?
Well, yes, France, unlike Britain, has an independent nuclear deterrent. It has fewer than 300 warheads, but they don't depend on US help as Britain does, mainly on submarines, a few launchers, nuclear warhead launchers as well. France's nuclear doctrine has never been specified, it's kept deliberately vague, but it's essentially just to defend the country's vital interests, the population, the sovereignty and the territory. That's what we all understand it to mean. President Macron said last night in an address to the nation, a formal address to the nation, that he would now open a debate on extending the French nuclear umbrella, as he called it, to other European countries. Germany has expressed an interest in this. So somehow France's vital interest will be extended to include a threat to the rest of Europe. Whilst President Macron said ensuring that the French president will continue to have the sole charge of whether to use a nuclear weapon or not.
And should we read this in light of what Donald Trump has done to cut off intelligence sharing with Ukraine as essentially a European movement to step up in the face of America stepping back? Yes,
absolutely. I mean, not only in terms of intelligence sharing, but in terms of everything that Donald Trump has done since coming to office. President Macron said last night that the United States remains our ally, and he hopes that America will continue to stand by Europe. But if that isn't the case, then Europe has to take its own destiny into its hands. He's calling for more defence spending, as indeed pretty much everyone else in Europe. He's also bringing together chiefs of staffs of countries that might be prepared to put troops on the ground in Ukraine, or at least back a European peace plan for Ukraine next week. And indeed, the nuclear proposal comes in this context. What if America pulls out? What if America is no longer a reliable ally? What if America's nuclear deterrent no longer covers Europe? How to keep Europe safe? Well, one option is obviously to extend the French and perhaps British nuclear deterrent to Europe, although it's not an easy matter by any means, and it's contested.
Obviously, President Zelensky is there at that meeting. Is there any discussion or possibility that the French could also be talking about extending that nuclear umbrella to Ukraine too?
Not that I've heard at the moment. The terms, I mean, President Macron said last night, I'm going to open a debate on it. So that says what it said. There was nothing very concrete. My understanding is that at the moment, no, there is, of course, talk of Ukraine joining the European Union if France was to extend the notion of its vital interests to the European Union, and Ukraine was part of the European Union, then that might be the case, but that's very, very far down the line at the moment.
Was there anything else overnight from President Macron in terms of the next steps with Donald Trump? We understand that there is a possibility that both Macron and Keir Starmer and President Zelensky potentially could go to Washington to try and finalise the minerals deal and some kind of security guarantee with Donald Trump in the next week or so. How likely is that, do you think?
That was announced by a French government spokesperson yesterday and then promptly refuted by the Elysee. So there's obviously some confusion over that. It's in the air, but it hasn't been decided, I think, is probably the answer.
Yeah, I wonder if it's because Donald Trump hasn't yet decided whether to welcome them over there to DC. Adam Sage, Times Paris correspondent, really appreciate your take this morning.
Thank you.
Do you think, Kate, that they'll need some sort of guarantees from Trump before they go there? I mean, Zelensky clearly will maybe Zelensky just has to take what he's given. Maybe that's the world he lives in. But presumably Macron and Starmer needs to be careful. Do they need a win out of that, or do they just need to throw themselves in front of the moving car?
I think they need to do what they had already done in the last time before they visited, so the last week or so, which was to make sure that there's a smooth glide path for the leaders to meet publicly. So behind the scenes with all these visits, it's not like you just get on a plane and turn up and then when you're in the meeting you work out what you want to talk about. There is a huge amount of diplomacy that goes on. Meetings, visits between both sides, back and forth, way ahead of the principals heading to meet, the President and the Prime Minister. And so that will be ongoing. I think what the French and the UK side are trying to work out is where is that sort of landing path at the moment for Trump. It's clear he wants the mineral deals changed to be more advantageous to America. Remember, it was slightly watered down in the original form from $500 billion to less than that. So I think there's going to be an increase in what America is asking for, but also from the European side now, especially in wake of intelligence sharing, I think there will be an increased demand for security guarantees on paper, and that will make things more difficult.
But they can't demand anything. I mean, you say there's a lot of diplomacy behind the scenes. We heard from Gavin Barwell last week that with Trump, it makes no difference because you can say to his chief of staff, we want to talk about A, B and C, and he sits down and he talks about D, E and F. And I just wonder whether we're impotent in this regard.
So I think that's true publicly. I think the reality is if you look at what's coming out of the US, Mike Waltz overnight has been saying this is a pause on intelligence sharing and we could look to get it back up and running quickly. Zelensky has said overnight, we've been having encouraging talks and next week we hope to see something change. Both of those, both sides are now saying there is a way to make this sort of work. I think you're right about Donald Trump. He is unpredictable, but behind the scenes there will be a huge amount of work going on because he ultimately doesn't want this to continue. The chaos and the uncertainty doesn't help America either if it goes on for a very long time.
But if he gets a better deal out of Ukraine, which he's going to do, it has worked, hasn't it?
Somebody suggested that Donald Trump's strategy is to throw loads and loads and loads of stuff up in the air, as much chaos and confusion as you can possibly get, push people as far as they can be pushed, and then recognise when they've reached the end point.
Yeah.
And I think that's the question. Have we now reached the end point? Is now the deal sort of...
I find it really interesting. Mike Waltz and Kellogg are mafia lawyers, aren't they? That basically the mafia boss does all sorts of things, and then a man in a suit comes out clutching his briefcase and gives it credibility. And either way he's saying, so Trump says we're getting rid of intelligence, and then we say, emollient words come from people like, well, maybe not permanently, and maybe it's just a suspension, and maybe this will change as the world changes. It doesn't take away from the fact, you've spoken to the former CIA director, it doesn't take away from the fact that extortion has happened. You can then put a front on it, which the US administration now has a habit of doing. Trump does something outrageous, and then a man in a suit says, well, maybe it's not quite as outrageous as it looks.
I think you're talking about two different things, though. You're talking about the politics versus the policy behind the scenes. And while the politics... I
don't think there's a distinction between the two when it comes to Trump.
I think that there probably is. I think we are, though, in a position now where the UK is probably pushed to its limit in terms of how far it can accept what America is now doing. And there might come a turning point for Keir Starmer where he looks to be out of step with the rest of the country. If things keep going in the direction they're going, more and more people will ask Keir Starmer to be more vocal, and he clearly doesn't want to be more vocal.
And that's so interesting because I just think he has, for better or for worse, he's hitched his wagon onto Trump. And the argument is, it's such an interesting point. Is there a breaking point? Like, what could Trump do next?
There will be a breaking point, but at the moment Keir Starmer's got the House behind him, including the opposition. So because
they're all scared of Trump. I mean, it's whether the politicians will have to move if the people move, I suppose. But maybe what are the British people? Do they feel? Will they get tired of just taking Trump's position? I mean, you can let us know what you make of this because it'll probably be down to you because in the end, Starmer has to consider what the people think. I mean, there's no election coming up, but you still don't want to be completely, as you say, out of step with the country.